All right, Big Man, today is Friday. It is January 13th. Welcome to the Dog Walk presented by Barstool Sports. Today I'm joined by John Garrido. He is a retired Chicago police officer of 32 years. He is also the founder of Garrido Stray Rescue Foundation. John, thanks for doing this. It's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Just retired in November.
Yes.
How you feeling?
Love it.
Yeah?
Yes. I've said I definitely miss the officers. I miss the camaraderie, but there's a significant difference, and you don't realize it until you do retire. When you're doing it for that long, there's probably a level of stress that we don't even realize as officers that we have. But once you go, it's so relaxing, and not to mention the freedom of speech is intoxicating. I now can say whatever I want and do whatever I want. I don't have to worry about repercussions. I love it.
Yeah, that seems to be the consensus. And that's why I wanted to have you on. I'm doing this whole kind of series here, hopefully having some of the candidates on here in coming weeks. But obviously public safety is one topic that I want to get into. And it's rare that you could find someone from the department that's willing to talk, and with you being retired and you're kind of ready to say what you have on your mind. And you've been doing it on your Facebook page and everything.
I have been, yeah. So we're only, 6 weeks out since retirement, maybe 7 weeks now. And I figure I only have a small window before people will be like, oh, that's just that curmudgeon-y old retired guy. So people need to know, I think. Yeah,
for sure. So we'll get into all of it. So I guess the first thing that everyone always kind of gets into it is, and it's a very base, very broad question, is Chicago, is it safe? Is it safe? How would you answer that? It's such a broad question, but it's something that everyone will ask.
I would say that it's not as safe as it was.
Okay.
All right. It definitely, you've got safer neighborhoods, safer areas. Places that were once considered extremely safe are no longer as safe as they used to be. And it's not to say that it's complete chaos everywhere all the time, because you could easily get that idea just from listening to the news, because all they're obviously highlighting is all the bad. But there is a definite problem. The criminal element has expanded its territory out into neighborhoods that it didn't used to be in, into parts of the city that it didn't used to be in. Downtown, in particular, has changed dramatically. So I would say that, like any big city, but probably more so now with Chicago, you definitely have to be aware of your surroundings a little more and pay attention and just be careful.
Okay. So what would you relate that to, the expansion into those places where it wasn't at before?
It's 100%. It's not 100%. It's a variety of things, right? So once we had, part of it's a change in leadership, right? So depending on who's running the city, the mayor, then they put their people in place to run the Chicago Police Department. That has a significant impact on how we are able to police the city. So if you've got a mayor who's going to be a little bit more of a micromanager, that's going to be a little more controlling and base a lot of policing decisions based on politics instead of need, that's has a significant negative impact on the way the officers are able to police. And we can go into the whole where officers don't feel like a mayor has their back or it doesn't support our officers. And probably you can go back to the beginning of time. Officers are always going to say, oh, this mayor is not good or that mayor is not good. But there's no doubt that in recent times, Mayor Lightfoot has definitely had a significant negative impact on our officers. Just to give an example of that, when there was a concerted, coordinated attack on the officers that were out there on the bike patrol in front of the Columbus statue. And you remember that they were throwing shooting the fireworks at the officers and throwing the frozen bottles of water.
Yes.
And it was later shown how they were coordinated with the banners that they had concealing themselves, and they were actually changing their shirts and the whole deal. When that happened, one of the first things out of the mayor's mouth is, if you saw any officers doing any wrongdoing, please call and notify COPA. Mm-hmm. So you've got a situation where these officers were just attacked. The last thing that they want to hear is the person who's in charge of everything her first thing is to play to her base and say, if there was any officers doing anything wrong, report them. How about let's have an investigation and find out what's going on, what happened here. We're sorting through things, and I hope our officers are okay. There were some officers that were seriously hurt, the whole thing. But that's just an idea of how we don't get the support from her. Her first thought or first go-to is always, what did the officers do wrong? As opposed to, let's have an investigation and figure it out. Another quick example is the Bobby Rush popcorn scandal. The same thing. You had a situation there where she saw an opportunity to...
Can you explain the Bobby Rush popcorn scandal for those who don't know?
Yes, right. So when the George Floyd civil unrest came to Chicago, that was, I think, was at the end of May. So it started on that Friday night, that last weekend of May, and it went into Friday. It increased on Saturday, and it spilled over into Sunday. After that, Bobby Rush went to the mayor and said, hey, there were some officers that were lounging in my office, and they were cooking and eating my popcorn and drinking my coffee in his office.
And Bobby Rush is?
Bobby Rush is a state representative,
okay. Mm-hmm.
Right? Illinois state representative. Mm-hmm. So instead of saying, okay, well, let's do an investigation, she immediately rolled out the first deputy at the time and the chief of patrol, and she had a press conference with herself and Bobby Rush, and they destroyed these officers, put their images up there of them taking naps and laying down in this office. And what was later determined, what we learned, and we understood as officers exactly what was going on. There were situations where we were taking busloads of officers and putting them in areas where there was rioting going on, mm-hmm. or civil unrest going on, and to protect the properties and whatnot in that area. So we're told when we have these officers there, rest them as much as we can, mm-hmm. if there's nothing going on, because we don't know when we're going to have to deploy them, and they might be on their feet for the next 10 hours or 15 hours. So that's what would happen. So they presented this video and this image of what was going on as if it happened at the peak of the civil unrest. You had First Deputy Riccio got on there and gave a story of how he was out there side by side with one of the other commanders who lost her helmet, and while they were out there getting rocks and things thrown at them, these officers were lounging. Completely untrue. This video was from 1 o'clock in the morning, Monday. So Sunday night, Monday. Mm-hmm. I was actually at 47th in Indiana. We were coming back. I could hear the radio. There was nothing going on after midnight. Mm-hmm. Very, very little, if anything. These officers were a large group, and there was nothing going on where they were. Bobby Rush's office was open, whether it was open for them or just accidentally left open, whatever. So what they were doing is they were arresting the officers. They had no access to bathrooms. They didn't have anything there. So there were officers outside of his office to stand guard to protect the area if anything were to jump off. And then they were arresting officers. Again, this is after 72 hours of just a chaotic weekend. Yeah. So these officers really take a break. But again, we know what happened, and we see what does this mayor do. She puts out this horse and pony show and basically just takes an opportunity to beat down on our officers, which was just completely out of line and wrong.
Mm-hmm. Now, were there ever moments where you did feel like she came out and had your back and you were surprised?
Not that I could recall.
Not
that I can think of right now. No, nothing comes to mind right now.
Nothing comes to mind?
No, because majority of the time it's always confrontational. It's always something about, when an officer commits suicide, she'll come out and say something nice. Mm-hmm. When an officer is killed in the line of duty, she'll come out and say something nice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that's the time that I really recall. Obviously, when the whole tragedy,
right? And she'll say things like "thank an officer" when you see him, and she'll say those things. But more times than not, it's always that go-to of what did the officers do wrong? Are the officers doing something wrong? The officers aren't somehow holding their end of the community engagement. It's always mm-hmm. It always comes down on the officers as a group that we're somehow systemically racist and playing into that narrative, which in my opinion is it's wrong. I mean, our officers are out there working day and night, putting their lives on the line to protect the citizens of this city on a regular basis. And it literally is, you're going to have a few bad apples, or not even that they're bad apples. Officers will make mistakes. Sometimes they do. Maybe sometimes it's because their days off are canceled all the time, so they're tired. Or maybe it's just because of lack of experience if they're early on the job, or situations that they're in. But it's not intentional. Officers aren't getting up in the morning and thinking, what am I going to go do bad today? Now, that's not to say that there aren't some. Take any large group of people you put together, get a large group of lawyers together, you're going to have some bad ones, or some priests, or some whatever. You're going to have, in large groups of people, a small percentage of people that are committed to do things wrong, but that's just not the case for the majority of our officers.
Do you think if there was a strong, stance like, hey, behind you, this and that from a mayor, maybe, possibly one who's elected here, that would help morale and that would help the department?
100%. It would at least be the first step in that direction. I mean, there's been so much damage done that it's going to take a lot. You've got a combination of the regular beatdowns that we get from the media a lot. So in general, that's always going to be there. But to turn the tide and get them to start reporting more good stories than the bad stories, having a mayor that's going to stand up for us and have our backs and definitely be there for our officers on a regular basis would be a huge game changer, because with that, they're going to put people in positions of power that are also going to hopefully support that idea. When you've got a confrontational mayor, a mayor that's always seems to be out to get the officers, then her superintendent is right there with her, because obviously his job depends on the mayor, and if he's not going to do the opposite of what the mayor wants, so that filters down and comes through the ranks. And even officers or supervisors that are up at the top that normally would want to do the right thing and to support our officers, and they try to the best that they can, they also know that a lot of them are just worried about their own jobs. They're worried about keeping the spots that they have.
Yeah, it's so many things are fucked up in that way, right? Like, even if them at the top think they know the right decision, they might not do it because they have to appease who they have to appease.
Right, and then you got to worry about Kim Fox, wanting to prosecute our officers on a regular basis for things that would never be prosecutable before.
Well, how does that work? Is that affect officers at all? Is it a mind fuck at all? Where it's like, why? Is that a thought process at all?
100%.
Where you're like, hey, why would I go arrest this guy if he's just going to get out?
100%. So with officers, it's almost like the greyhound at the gate, right? Gate opens, rabbit goes, you're going to go. So officers, they see a bad guy, boom, they're going to take action. They're not going to not do the job, but it's always going to be in the back of their minds. I had two officers come in, and it was right around the time of this whole foot chase policy thing that was coming in, and they saw some guys. They were looking for a crew that was stealing catalytic converters. They saw the car. The car was trapped in an alley, couldn't get out. The guy got out and started running. The officers went after him and came to a busy street, and the offender ran across the street, and the officer literally stopped and thought to himself, this is what he said. He goes, I thought to myself, this guy is going to get hit by a car or something like that. I'm going to get blamed for it. So the guy got away. So officers are conscious of it. There is some thought there that I've got to be careful, because if this goes south, even if it's no fault of my own, the blame could get put on me, or just may get put on me, and then what? I lose everything. I lose my job, possibly go to jail. It's a crazy climate that it's become.
Yeah. And how to kind of switch gears here, because I did reach out to people to who had questions and whatnot. How do you fix some of the glaring issues, right? Like one big question obviously people had was people are afraid to take some of the public transportation. I don't know how much hand you had in that. Were you ever on the public transportation beat or anything like that?
No, but we had public transportation that runs through the districts that I've worked in.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole issue is manpower and allocation of manpower. Mm-hmm. Because of the climate, whether it be from, especially since in the last couple of years, it's become extremely difficult to recruit and get officers or people to come and be the police, to come on the job. When I took the test back in the late 80s, there was 35,000 people that took the test with me. Now we're lucky if we get 1,500 to come and take a test. People just aren't taking the job anymore. So
And that was what? You probably had what, 2 tests a year maybe?
oh yeah,
Back in the day?
it was constant. Yeah.
Now there's what, a test every week, a test every month?
Almost seems like daily sometimes.
crazy.
You can just show up and test.
Yeah.
So because of that, our manpower is dropped significantly. Add to it that we're losing with retirement. So retirements have always fluctuated. It's based on if you have a hiring surge after Vietnam in the 60s, well, go forward 30 years, you're going to have a surge in retirements because they've come up on their time, right? We had a big surge in the 90s. So 30 years later, you're going to have a peak in that. But you were always in the past able to hire more than we're retiring. So if 600 retire in a year and you're hiring 1,000, well, at least you're replacing those 600 and adding 400. So you're able to keep up with attrition. What's happened lately that's new and it's different is the resignations. If we had 10, 20 people in a year that would resign from the department, whether it's just because they just didn't want to do it anymore, they didn't like the job, which usually almost never happened, but majority of the time was because they were leaving to go to another department. But it was rare. Back in the day, what would happen is people would be waiting to become a Chicago police officer. They would take a job in the suburbs, and then they would, as soon as an opening came up or if they got the call, they would quit the job in the suburbs and come here. That's flipped. Not only has it flipped, it's flipped dramatically. We've gone from, I think in 2019, we had 50 resignations to in 2022, we had over 368 resignations. People are not, and the thing about it is they're not just quitting the job and staying home. They're going to other departments. So they're not leaving law enforcement. They're leaving Chicago law enforcement. The way things are run here are causing them to leave in droves. So now you take that 650 officers that retired because they're just up on their time. Mix in there some of that is also people are just like, I'm getting out of here. They're retiring sooner than they normally would.
Is it that, or is it more because it's more dangerous?
I do not believe that officers leave this job because of danger.
Okay.
I don't think it's a factor at all.
Really? Okay.
Not even a little bit. Honestly,
Interesting.
I do not think that danger is a factor with any officer anywhere in the country.
Interesting.
We don't think of that. Mm-hmm. We run towards the danger, right?
Gotcha.
And we're not thinking, oh my God, I'm running towards danger. You know, our adrenaline is rushed. We're like, we're trying to get the bad guy.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just, I think that especially in Chicago with the number of resignations that we're having now is they're leaving here and going to other departments because of the way this department is run. Mm-hmm. And it's because of the leadership or the lack of leadership that we have. So now you take that 650 retirements and 380 resignations, you're up over 1,000. And what did they just announce? They're touting how they hired 965 officers. Okay, well, we're still at a net loss.
Yeah.
So when we don't have the manpower, it makes it difficult to cover a lot of different things that we used to be able to do. So I think they're using private security for CTA. We'd have special employment. We'd have officers work their days off for it, but we're not able to just throw the manpower that we would need to throw at it to have officers on the trains and have a visible presence. There's certain things, certain crimes that happen in certain areas of the city that a visible presence will deter. So you can throw thousands of officers on the south and west sides like we are doing right now, and you can see the numbers. We're still, right? Look at how many people are shot. Look at how many, they just go around the corner because there's a lot of different societal issues going on in those neighborhoods that need to be addressed. You can't police your way out of it. But in areas like downtown, the north side, northwest side, even the southwest side of Chicago or CTA, those you can deter crime with a visible presence. So if you have the manpower to put there, you would actually be able to have a significant impact and reduce crime because those are crimes of opportunity, right? South and west side, it might be drug wars or drug things that are going on. CTA, it's theft, usually.
Yeah.
Robberies, mugging, whatnot. So that stuff can be deterred if you can have a visible police presence there. But the problem is our allocation is off. We've got, I think I looked at it before I retired. There's over 2,800 officers that are working in units. That would be like if they're in the narcotics unit or the gang unit or a community safety team. If you add all those units together where officers are, we've got about 2,800 of them, almost 3,000 officers that are in these units. And to compare that, I'll use the 16th district for an example. And let me know if I'm getting too
No,
into the
no,
weeds.
no.
Okay.
This is Chicago specific. So if you live in Chicago, this should make sense.
Mm-hmm. So the 16th district is the district on the northwest side of Chicago. It's basically from Cicero west of the city limits and Belmont north of the city limits. And it's roughly 30 square miles. So it's a very, very big district.
Biggest district, right?
One of the biggest, yes. And it would be considered probably one of the safest districts in the city. But of late, that's changing. While it's maybe safer than, let's say, Inglewood on the west side or south side, it's still a very, it's still getting, we still have crime.
Yeah.
There was last year, I think 400 vehicle thefts. The catalytic converter thefts are through the roof. Burglaries are through the roof. A lot more property crimes and things. And we're even getting some murders and some shootings. Lots of shootings are starting to occur. So it's starting to get busier. But that's a result of, over time, depleting the manpower they're not replacing officers that are retired from that district. So to give an example, in 2001, over 20 years ago, we had 271 officers in the district. Now we're down to 165. That's over 100 officers that we don't have anymore. So what happens when you've got a district that has 271 officers? Well, at that time, you're able to have, and I'm going to have to explain a little bit about beats. So the district is made up of, it's divided into beats, right?
Yeah.
And it's in 3 sectors. So we have in the 16th district a total of 12 beats. So to put a car on every one of those beats, you need 12 police cars. And ideally, you want 2 officers in each of those cars, right? So that's how you would man those beats. So if you have the proper allocation of manpower, you would have a car on every one of those beats. Then you would have, in those 3 sectors, you would have 2 rapid response cars, right? So they would be able to overlap and cover if one of those officers are down on a job, if they made an arrest or they take their lunch or whatever. So that would be another 6 cars. Then you would have a traffic car that would strictly deal with traffic accidents and whatnot. You would have foot patrols up in your business district. So at 6 corners, we would have a foot officer. We would have another one over in Jefferson Park, another one at Belmont and Central in the Cragen district there. So you have all these things. You would have a gang team of 8 officers and a sergeant to deal with just gang issues in the district. That's on top of your 3 TAC teams, the tactical teams. Those are 3 10-man teams. You would also possibly put up a robbery and a burglary team. When you have the manpower, you can do all that. We've been so stripped down now, we're barely able to put up the 12 beat cars. That's it. So you've got, for 30 square miles, sometimes a total of 10 officers protecting the entire district because we don't have anybody because they've depleted it so much. So what I was getting at, to circle back to the CTA, if as a citywide district, a law enforcement, right, the police department, if we don't have the manpower, then you have to scale down some of these other units to put those officers back on the front lines, because the patrol division those are all the police districts. That's the backbone of the department. And if you wanted to beef up CTA, you're going to have to make these other units a little bit smaller and pull back some of those 3,000 officers and put them into districts. Now, if we have this big hiring surge and bring in more officers, then you can beef up those other support units. But right now, they're not doing that. So our districts are starving for personnel, and they're barely able to keep up. And a point that a lot of people don't know is, of those 3,000 officers, one is the mayor's detail. So Mayor Lightfoot definitely likes to be protected. As much as she likes to beat up on the police, she definitely likes to be surrounded by them. Mm-hmm. So I looked. There was a lawsuit when Rahm was in because he reduced the size of his police detail. So I can see from the lawsuit it says exactly what was there. So when Daley was in, he had a total of 21 officers and 2 commanders that were on his protection detail. And then wherever his house was, that district then would put a squad car in front, maybe a squad car in back. And then he would also, the district that covers City Hall, he'd have a couple officers from that district would also cover that. So let's go crazy and call it a total of 30 officers, maximum. Mm-hmm. Well, when Rahm got in, he wanted to cut that down, according to this lawsuit. And he asked Terry Hillard to reduce it. That was the superintendent at the time. So he did. So he took it down to 1 commander and 16 officers. And then those districts would cover his house. right? Lightfoot got in, and she immediately brought it back up to 21 officers, and then she added, it was 21 officers and 1 commander, right? Then she added 3 sergeants and a lieutenant to her unit. Then the civil unrest happened in 2020. Then she created another unit called the Mayor's Support Unit. In that unit, she put 79 police officers and another 6 sergeants total. So if you add it all up, she has, for her protection detail, a total of 99 officers, 9 sergeants. I scratched that. It's 10 sergeants because she just added another sergeant last week. So 10 sergeants, a lieutenant, and a commander. That is obscene to have that many. On her house, she's got 2 squad cars parked in front, 2 squad cars parked in back, and 2 that roam the area. If you put 2 officers in each of those cars, which they do, you've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 officers that are watching her house. A minimum of a block away, she's got a SWAT car. They call it a SORT car. And that's got 2 SWAT officers. So now you're up to 14 officers. They are protecting her house whether she's there or not. She can go on vacation for a week, and there are 14 officers in cars surrounding her house, watching her house 24 hours a day. Overtime is through the roof. Any media out there, overtime, or what you should do is FOIA the overtime for units 542 and 544. Those are the 2 units. 542 is her personal detail. Those are the officers that travel with her. And 544, those are the officers that are on protecting her house.
Wow.
She's got 100 officers. So here, well, let's just look at just what's protecting her at that time, right? So you've got her, let's say it's 12 officers on her house, and then she's got 8 officers that travel with her all the time. So that's 20 officers. When the 16th district with 30 square miles sometimes has a total of 12 or 13 officers protecting 30 square miles.
I mean, she's got a lot of enemies. She's got a lot of enemies.
Every mayor does.
I know. That's a lot.
I don't know. I mean,
that's a shit.
That's
a
just
shitload.
That's just over
That's
the.
a fucking shitload of cops.
That is a lot of police
That's
officers.
a shitload of cops.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah,
That's a lot.
yeah.
That's a shit ton of cops.
Yeah,
That's a shit ton of cops.
Here, you know what? You probably could pull half of them and put them on the trains.
Yeah.
Throw 50 police officers to ride the trains.
Yeah. Be good.
That'd be a start.
So then, all right. Wow.
I don't
That's
process that for a second, right?
That's some numbers.
That's some crazy
numbers, John.
Yeah.
So then
you can back them all up too.
Yeah, and like
there.
you say about I mean, obviously that makes sense. If you're short, it's a little bit different. This isn't fucking Aeropostale where you fucking could have one guy work the register and you fold some stuff while you do both.
You can't do more with less with law enforcement. You shouldn't do more with less because first, it's unsafe for the officers, right? You got all these officers that are working their days off as much as they can to try to fill these cars, so they're tired. They're working one-man cars. We used to almost never have one-man cars working at night, overnight. Right, just because it's safer to have 2 officers together in a car. That is now happening on a regular basis in some of these districts. So you've got beats that are not being manned at all. You've got one-man cars out there. And when you have a one-man car, just because you're filling that car, any job that has an offender on the scene, or if it's a domestic or something like that, you have to send 2 officers. So fine, we could have 12 cars for the 12 beats in the 16th district, all each have 1 officer in a car. But if a domestic comes in, 2 cars are going. So now 2 beats don't have a car patrolling it.
Takes away.
And then if something happens on one of those beats, they pull an officer from another one, and he goes and handles that one. Then another car goes down on lunch. Another car makes an arrest for shoplifting. Next thing you know, there's not very many cars out there patrolling. So that's where you lose the aspect of proactive policing.
Yeah.
Which is so important to these districts, especially the north and west side districts, the north districts, the southwest side districts. Those districts rely on visibility because majority of the crime is driving into those districts.
And it's the opportunity, like you said.
Right.
It's
so you want to have that visibility.
Know this, and they know, the criminals know what's going on.
And that's what people say, like, well, John, you're out there telling the bad guys that, it's open season. No, the crime and the problem that's been happening has been happening way before I retired.
Well, that's my next question, and well, actually, I have two questions, so we'll start with both of these because you brought it up.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk to you about. I want to ask you about what you think about them going with private security for the CTA, and then obviously the scanner decision that they made, the scanner encryption. So we'll start with private security because
So
we're on CTA.
private security, CTA already has private security.
Yeah, so that's what they
Right.
made the decision to dump a bunch of money into that program.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
do you think that's a good call? I think it's unarmed. I don't know. What's your
Right.
is a general
So
thought?
bad guys know. Well, first of all, just because of just what's happened over the last couple of years, even officers, you'll see as soon as they arrive on scene, the offender, the bad guys, or even just the people in the neighborhood, they're coming up with their cameras right away and they're taunting officers, and they're already not giving officers any respect out there as it is. The ones that are up to no good, in general, for the most part, I'd say the majority of the citizens in Chicago, they respect our officers and they support them. But that's the silent majority. So it's that small minority that's out there causing problems, but they've become emboldened and braver, and they disregard officers. Well, if they're doing that to Chicago police officers, what do you think they care about a private security guard? They're certainly not going to worry about the mall cop that's on a train. They're just not. So unless those security officers are able to actually take significant action and do something, that visibility isn't going to do so much, because I think the bad guys are fully aware that private security guard isn't really going to be able to do anything to them.
Yeah.
So if you're going to throw money into anything, I would say you want to throw it into hiring more officers and putting them on the trains.
Now, what do you say to people who say, "Well, what are we talking about? CPD gets allotted the most amount of money than anybody else into the city. What do they need more money for?"
They do.
Because that's what people say.
100%. And I would say if you're not safe where you live, where you work, or where your kids go to school and play, nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. You can have all of the programs in place, all of the whatever it is that you can think of that's important to you. If you can't walk out your front door, or even just sit in your living room and worry about a bullet coming through your window, none of the rest of that stuff matters. So while everything can always be managed better, maybe we don't have to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in overtime for Mayor Lightfoot's security detail. There's ways we can save money, I'm sure. Maybe we have too many commanders at the upper ranks, too many people getting taken care of that are making, $180,000 to $200,000 a year. There's a lot of ways that money can be saved, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But in general, you've got to have a safe environment to function. And what leads to that also is businesses, right? So now if businesses can thrive and they don't have to worry about getting stuck up on a regular basis or getting burglarized on a regular basis, they stay here, and then that's tax revenue, and it all feeds into it. So I don't think you can just say, well, the police department gets so much money, they get the most amount of money out of any other unit, and that's a waste of money somehow. Let's defund that. All I would say is if you're not safe, nothing else matters.
Yeah. And then going back to so it's been recent, probably in the last month or so, where they encryption to the scanners, right? They right. Made them delayed. So right. And what the thought process there is that a lot of the criminals are listening to these, and they know when, if there's a catalytic converter crew, they know,
and that's true.
Yeah.
They do. We've also had where during the civil unrest we saw it a lot because our radios weren't encrypted, so people were able to get some knockoff radios and were actually able to interfere. So then now we have to switch over to another frequency because they're coming on and they're giving out fake calls and they're so they absolutely have to do something to make it safe for our officers, so that way that they're not able to there. But for a long time, they've always, even narcotics, when I used to be in narcotics, and we'd be doing a search warrant, and we'd have to really be careful not to say anything on the radio because they have scanners on. And so if they heard that we were coming or they were going to hit that house, then they would flush everything down the toilet and get rid of it before we get there. So it's important on a policing aspect, to be able to do our jobs to make sure that the bad guys aren't listening in. But at the same time, I do understand about the need for transparency and the general public to know what's going on. So I think if they were able to, they were talking about doing some type of delay.
Yeah, that's what I saw. I think that's what's going on now, but I could be wrong. Maybe certain.
But it should be a delay
districts.
of 100% of. I mean, everything should be still released. Just delay it.
Yeah.
If they're able to do that. I think what the concern was is that the department was picking and choosing what they were going to
Delay.
They're delaying and then releasing. So,
Yeah.
and I think that's where we have a problem. It's like, okay, well, what are you trying to hide?
Yeah, you can't withhold certain stuff, and yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, really the only issue is just two things: officer safety, not allowing people to be able to cut in and actually talk on the radio, and then two would be the giving them a heads up so they know we're coming.
You said you worked in narcotics for a while. Let's get into
did.
that a little bit. How much of violence in Chicago is drug fueled?
Wow, a very large percent of it. It's money.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's just so much money in it. So it's, I don't know if you can put a percentage on it, but I would probably say, because you think about it, first of all, you got the violence that goes with it, right? The turf wars with the offenders. You got the rip-offs and stuff where junkies are going to buy and maybe they get ripped off by somebody who grabs them before they get to their dealer. You've got junkies that need to get the money, so now they're doing burglaries and they're doing shopliftings and they're doing stick-ups and doing different things to be able to just get money so they can go get their drugs. So I'd say drugs are at the root of a lot of our problems for sure.
And that's just kind of.
How do you fix that?
How do you fix that?
I don't know. I mean, they tried to, I guess, with legalizing marijuana to a certain extent. I don't know that that's had a significant impact. I mean, look at the numbers. Our crime is, not too different than it was before that, right?
Yeah.
It's not like it all of a sudden dropped off because there's still obviously heroin out there and there's still cocaine and meth and things like that.
Is there much help from the federal agencies?
Yeah, they work closely with narcotics.
Yeah.
And DEA. They come up with some big seizures and things, but that's just overall as a nation. Just we're coming through our borders, and all bad guys do all day long is think about ways to sneak it in.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of us, trying to intercept it, intervene. But how you fix that, I don't know. That's a bigger.
It's a large scale thing.
Bigger issue. Yeah. I guess the idea that a child growing up in a neighborhood that has open air drug markets, that's trying to do the right thing and go to school and do what they have to do to be a part of society, then sees the kid that's been recruited into the gang wearing the brand new gym shoes and the brand new clothes, and they're getting paid $100 to $200 to stand on the corner and yell 5-0 and warn them, and so it's easy for them to get pulled into that lifestyle. And it's hard. They see the bling, they see the money, they see the way of life that is enticing to them. So it's difficult.
Yeah. And then I say the big agencies. There was, for a long time, people were screaming about the National Guard. What's from stopping them from coming in? What's your thoughts on that?
So that was a big deal, especially during the George Floyd riots when those started. Is why aren't they bringing in the National Guard? Why aren't they doing that? And again, when you're making decisions based on politics, there's are always going to be bad decisions. At that time, it was always worried about the look. How is it going to look if we do that? Is it going to look like the mayor doesn't have control of the city if she's got to depend on the National Guard to come in? They instead of, in my opinion, putting the safety of the residents first, their actual first decision is how is this going to look, and that's probably been politics since the beginning of time, right? They're usually worried about themselves first before they are worried about anything else after that. So I think that the mayor should work closer with the governor and bring in the National Guard when need be. We could have at least had the additional manpower at the beginning of the George Floyd riots to get a jump on it and get a handle on it and get the National Guard out there and show a presence right away. But that wasn't the plan at the time. She didn't even want to put the bridges up initially because she thought it would look bad. There was so much advice offered to her at that time, and she just refused to accept it because it was just based on the look.
Yeah, I mean that time was like unlike anything else, right? That was
Oh, we had Bulls riots before, but that was all celebratory.
Yeah. That was a crazy time, man.
Yeah.
So, but is that something you could ever see happening with the net? Like, is that an option? Because to me, it's like when I think of like our HQ is in New York, our headquarters in New York, and when I go to New York, and it seems like it's changing a little bit. Don't quote me, but it seems like New York's having a little bit. A lot of people are leaving too. I could be wrong.
But there's still I've seen at least pictures of academy classes where they've got
they still have
hundreds of us. They're still hiring a ton.
Still in a much better place, but they're they got just stationary cops in every corner. It feels
everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And just a pure.
They started out. They've always had more. That's why when you had like McCarthy when he came here, a lot of the ideas that he had were great ideas if you had the manpower that they have in New York. I mean, they just so even with the exodus that they may have leaving the city there, they still have a lot of police officers and. High visibility works in certain neighborhoods.
What's the armed carjackings? What's the any solution to that? How, if you were in charge, how do we get a handle on this?
Stop the carjackings, boy. So with anything, it's like once the cat's out of the bag, it's hard to get them back in, and now that they've gotten a taste of what it's like to be able to do this, some of these they're kids. They think it's a game. They're out there. It's Grand Theft Auto in real life, and it's hard to get a handle on. A lot of this stuff is extremely difficult to get a handle on because it's been let go for so long. And when I say for so long, I mean even just a few years. It doesn't take long for the bad guys to figure out that they can get away with stuff, and then once they're getting away with it, it's hard to all of a sudden you're going to put them in check again. So what you need to do is to be able to hold them more accountable. Like no cash bail, that's not a good idea. We want to be able to make sure that there's consequences. And that's what it seems like it comes down to. There's just no accountability. They want to cater and all these laws to under the guise of, well, it unproportionately targets black and brown people. But the fact remains, if those happen to be the communities where the crime is happening, well, then you're going to have a larger percentage of black and brown people that are being arrested. But if you have no accountability and it's just a revolving door and they get to walk in and walk out, well, then why do they care? It's just a part of doing business. It's still worth it. So I think you'd have to, the first thing would be is to increase penalties for these crimes that they're committing. And keep them in jail, make it significantly more inconvenient to want to do these things. I mean, that's where I would start anyway.
Yeah.
But I don't know that our legislature has the wherewithal to do that. I don't know that the Black Caucus would step up and allow it to happen, to increase penalties on a lot of these crimes. And Kim Foxx certainly isn't going to be the one to do it.
Yeah. Is there a Is there a stat that you point to? Because I know there's always they always like to point crime is down. Is there a stat that you point to that would really tell you the truth to that? Is there something you look at?
So they're always going to be able to manipulate stats, right? There will be murders and shootings, and the way that they'll classify them, and at the time that they'll report them to come up with the overall stats. That's why if you go, there's a website called Hey Jackass. If you look at their crime stats compared to what the department puts out, they're usually a little bit different. And I would lean toward that the Hey Jackass stats are probably a lot more accurate. So they're always going to manipulate them, but at the end of the day, regardless of what the stats are, is the perception is reality. How does the average citizen feel in their neighborhood?
Yeah.
If they don't feel like they're safe, or if they feel like crime is up, then it doesn't matter what the stats say. The fact remains that you're impacting their lifestyles, their way of life, by not controlling the crime that is occurring.
Yeah. So then let's try to end here on I guess solutions. If you were named the top dog tomorrow, what do you think are some big things to kind of get the trajectory back the right way?
Yeah, I think the first thing you need to do is take a look at your district manpower, and you need to replenish that. And if that means shrinking down some of these units, even if it's temporarily, just until you can actually hire more people and you can get that back up, you need to change a lot of the upper echelon of the department. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of people that have been promoted that probably weren't ready to be promoted. There's zero transparency in how they make their promotion decisions. You've got people that have gone from, they're at the rank of sergeant, and then they get made meritorious lieutenant, and then commander and deputy chief and chief within 10 months. So if it was just one person, you'd be like, okay, well, that must be some super stellar officer, right? But it's not. It's happening over and over and over. I mean, I can give you a list of 24 people that have gone from sergeant to either commander or above within a short period of time, some of them within 3 months. And the problem with that is they're not letting those officers grow in that rank and learn the rank. So now they're moved up to these upper levels, and they just don't know, not by any fault of their own, they don't know and understand the system of what they're supposed to be doing, because they've just been moved into it because they're either just trying to fill a spot with a person based on gender or race, or they're just somebody's friend or some connection or whatever it is. So I don't fault those people that are in those spots. You know, you come to me and say, hey, you're going to be deputy chief in 10 months, who's going to say no? But the problem is when things go bad and go south, they didn't have the opportunity to gain the experience that they need to be able to make the right decisions. So the first thing you would need to do is take a look at the manpower in the districts, and if you need to shrink some of those units and put the manpower back where it needs to be, you need to make lots of changes up at the top, up the upper echelon, and really work on officer wellness and getting these officers to feel like that the city and the department is there for them, and that they are part of the team and not just a tool. Mm-hmm. And then hopefully if you can build that camaraderie and build that up that way, then we can start to make some changes and get some things done, and at least get the officers where they're supposed to be. Yeah.
Can that be done though? Can a demotion like that be done?
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's the thing that can happen.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. So the way it works is you have the ranks of, there's a patrolman, mm-hmm. and then detective is not a rank above patrolman, but it's a different unit. But it's not just a unit, it's actually a promotion. But then it goes up sergeant, and then lieutenant, and then those are the ranks that you can get to by testing, and then a percentage of those are made by merit, and merit promotions, that's a whole, we can do a 40-minute segment on merit promotions. Yeah. It sounds good, but it's usually just friends and family.
Yeah.
And then captain is 100% merit. They decide who they're going to make captain. Again, the same thing. And then
mayor promotion?
Mm-hmm.
You said what promotion?
Captain.
Sorry? Okay.
Captain is another one. Merit.
Oh, merit. Sorry. All
yes.
Right.
Yeah. It's also
right.
Just 100% that. Yeah. And then after that, it's commander, deputy chief, first deputy, and then superintendent. So all of those ranks, for example, the superintendent can promote anybody to, they call those exempt ranks, commander or above. So you can be a patrolman with 3 years on the job, and they can say, boom, you're a commander. Matter of fact, they did that. The commander of the mayor's detail, I believe his name is Harris. I think he's got very little time on the job, and he's a patrolman, but they made him commander. And I think he might have just got promoted again to deputy chief. So you can promote anybody up. So if you were to demote them, they would go back to their original rank. So if he got demoted tomorrow, he'd go back to being a patrolman. Most of the commanders are lieutenants or captains. So if they got demoted, they would just go back to those ranks.
Gotcha. And it's like, I mean, it goes back to, there's got to be some social programs or whatnot too, that, because it got to start in the communities as well, because like you said, It's a lot of kids it's happening to, that are falling down wrong paths and whatnot. So it's all a very sad thing. So
right. And for those communities, and that would go back to the politics end of it. If you live on the west side of Chicago and you've had the same alderman and the same state rep and the same state senator for the last 30 years, and your community is still in shambles, and you still have boarded up storefronts and open air drug markets and all that is going on, well, then obviously those elected representatives aren't doing anything for you. So people are just so programmed, and they just keep electing the same people over and over. What is that saying? If you keep doing the same thing over and over and you expect a different result, that's a definition of insanity.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that's what happens a lot. We have just such low voter turnout, and the ones that do turn out just keep on reelecting the same people.
Yeah. So yeah, that's we'll see here if I could get someone represented on the show from that sector of the social programs and whatnot, because that's someone that we need to figure out too. I know obviously Big Brothers and Big Sisters is a great program. I've had them on the show before. It's
Right.
Can't speak enough about them. They're great.
Right.
But yeah, it's needs to be fixed, right?
Yeah. Here, none of this is an easy fix.
No,
it's not saying this is the magic pill that's going to change everything dramatically. But there's a lot of things that we can clearly see have been done wrong over the last several years that can be changed and hopefully start to right the ship. And it's not going to happen overnight. I don't care who you put in as mayor; they're not going to be able to turn it around immediately. Mm-mm. But hopefully, if it's somebody that will listen, they should be able to start making the right changes and get in the right direction.
Yeah. Is there anyone that you kind of like right now, or anything have you put?
So I think the two best, in my opinion, and when I say the best, I believe that they're not only the best for the city, but the best for law enforcement, for showing their support for the officers and things, would be Paul Vallis and Willie Wilson. I like those two candidates. I know tonight we have a meet and greet for Willie Wilson up in our neighborhood in Gladstone Park. Last night, Paul Vallis was up in the 41st Ward at Tavern on the Point.
Oh, nice.
And I think somebody told me he had about 200 people out for his. We'll see how many people show up for Willie tonight. And, I think there are both. My dream scenario is that the mayor doesn't even make the runoff. And I really, really believe there's a strong possibility that may happen. And then the dream scenario would be Willie and Paul in the runoff, so that it's a win-win. Mm-hmm. I am not a Chewy fan at all. Mm-hmm. I think that if he were to get into the runoff with Vallis, I think Vallis will beat him, and I think even Willie would beat Chewy, because once you lay out, Chewy's another example of somebody who's been in office for how long, but what has he done?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, well, John, thanks for doing this.
Absolutely.
I appreciate the insight, and
definitely thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, and then we want to plug the Rescue Foundation again.
The Garrido Stray Rescue Foundation. Mm-hmm. So we became official in 2017, and we rescue about 300 dogs a year on average. They come through. Our primary focus is to get stray dogs back home to their families, and we're at about an 89% return to owner rate. So we're doing pretty good with that. And we've expanded into court advocacy, where we have people actually go to court on abuse cases and to hold offenders accountable. Like we just had that woman, she stabbed that little Chihuahua.
Yeah.
So we had probably about almost 15, 16 people show up at court, and just to make sure that the system doesn't let it fall through the cracks, which it can happen just because it's just so busy.
Totally.
And we do a lot of good things to help the animals, and we do microchipping events and things like that. So GarridoStrayRescue.org is our website. We're most active on Facebook, Garrido Stray Rescue Foundation. If you look it up there, that's where you'll see whenever dogs come in that are lost, and we're trying to get them back home to their families, and the ones that we can't that are up for adoption. And you can follow along there and see what we're doing.
Cool. Is that where you post all your stuff too? Do you have another page or anything?
I've got too many pages.
Okay.
So I've got Garrido Stray Rescue Foundation. I post a lot of my stuff on my own personal page, John Garrido, but I also have the Garrido Network.
Okay.
I've got a group and a page.
Okay.
And I put a lot of information out there.
Awesome. Well, thanks, John. Thanks for the insight. Thanks, everybody, for listening. That's it for today. That's it for this week. We'll be back on Monday. We will see you guys then.